And welcome back to Retro Wrestling Games Presents Saturday Morning RPG for the PlayStation 4. Today will be a very special episode. We'll be talking about a non-wrestling game. Saturday Morning RPG is a game that is dripping with nostalgia. If you're a kid of the 80s like myself and my tag team partner Matt, you will enjoy this game because it so many homages to the Saturday morning genre, the 80s in general. This game was released for Microsoft Windows, it was on Linux, Android, cell phone, mobile, PlayStation Vita, PlayStation 4, and it'll be coming out for the Wii U. Now, I have the PlayStation 4 version, which is a limited run. Actually, the company named Limited Run actually put out a limited run of these games. So it was they only made 1,980 or 1980. I guess that's the joke there.
Yeah.
Which is cute. So the way this game works, this game is essentially a Japanese role-playing game, just like a Final Fantasy or a Chrono Trigger. The main character's name is Marty in the first level, which is a dream kind of sequence they had there. So you're there with your girlfriend Samantha, and then they kidnap the Hood, which are your enemies for this game, who basically are just a plain ripoff of, Cobra Commander and such. So Commander Hood kidnaps your girlfriend Samantha, and you have to go rescue her. Your first fight, you get your ass handed to you, and then a wizard appears, and not like a wizard, like a Dungeons and Dragons type wizard. I mean, wizard from the movie The Wizard with Fred Savage. Yeah, he appears, he has his power glove with him, and he gives you a magical Trapper Keeper. So basically this Trapper Keeper has all your power-ups, your weapons, it's where you save, all this kind of cool stuff. You're able to change the cover of your Trapper Keeper, and it'll give you different abilities, like extra life or extra magic or what have you. In addition, throughout the game, or throughout when you progress through the game, you find Scratch and Sniff Snickers. So Scratch and Sniff stickers, for those of you who don't know, there were stickers that came out, I believe, in the 80s they had them. I don't know if they're older or not. And you would just take your fingernail, you scratch them, and they will have some sort of scent. So you had like root beer or socks or something terrible that really stunk. So throughout the game, you get your Scratch and Sniff stickers, and before each battle, you scratch them with the analog stick, and you get special abilities. So it would be like +5 magic, +10 health, resistance to stun. It's all like your role-playing, your RPG style abilities. Also throughout the game, they'll have vending machines where you can purchase additional weapons and upgrades for your weapons, and you'll find weapons throughout the game. So basically, within the first 5 minutes of the game, you'll find like a He-Man-esque sword that you'll use throughout the game. None of the weapons, for example, are a little Optimus Prime looking thing where you whip it out and you turn into Optimus Prime and then you run over everyone on the screen. In addition, there is a Fruit Stripes gum. If anyone knows what Fruit Stripe gum is, it's the gum with the zebra on it. You whip that out and a herd of zebra come out and kind of trample your opponents. Another weapon is, it looks like a CD. I'm going to call it a laser disc because I think laser disc would be more appropriate for this, where you just chuck them and hit people in the face. An Atari joystick, where you play a little mini game and then they'll inflict the amount of damage on your opponents here. So again, it's real funny, it's real cute. Interesting note, Vince DiCola, the composer for Rocky IV, which is my all-time favorite Rocky movie, and Transformers the movie, did the soundtrack for this game. So this game musically will get you pumped, bring you back to the 80s, with that kind of hard rock, I guess you would call it, amped up, high tempo kind of music. Another thing I want to bring up, the gameplay footage that you're seeing on the screen was brought to you by my 9-year-old son, who loves this game. He thinks it's awesome. So Tino, if you're listening, Daddy loves you, and thank you very much. He had a great time playing this game. As a kid born in the 80s myself, when it comes to cartoons, and I don't like today's cartoons. I don't think they're any good. There are some exceptions to that rule. For the most part, I think today's cartoons are crappy. So when my son was younger, I introduced him to, Voltron, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, Super Friends, those kind of shows. And so those are the shows that he kind of grew up with too. So he did have a lot of fun playing this game. He thought it was awesome. We did get through the first episode, or the first level, I guess you would call it. It took about an hour. So he did pretty well. He's a pretty good gamer. So he's much better than me at this point. So I think what we're going to talk about next is our memories of Saturday morning and Saturday morning cartoons being the topic of this show. So Matt, tell me about your memories of Saturday morning cartoons.
Well, I will say that being a normally wrestling type thing, I was often enduring a weekly struggle. Do I watch Super Friends or WWF Superstars? And I would flip back and forth depending on the episode. If it was a repeat, I would watch wrestling. But if it wasn't, I'd watch Super Friends almost all the time. And there was Spider-Man and his amazing friends eventually. I always found, though, with the Saturday morning cartoons, like there were the Smurfs and there were some other shows that were kind of like the Care Bears and then the various forms of things that kind of went over the years. I found that I enjoyed shows that were more dramatic, even if they were silly dramatic. I mean, for the longest time, Super Friends kind of had the same like cart running joke about Scooby-Doo, like I would have got away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
Right.
Super Friends almost always was, I know I unleashed a 30-foot tall monster in the city, but I wanted to get recycling noticed. You know, it's like, it was always some scientist with this ulterior motive that was more sincere, but just had no way of really doing it. They used some kind of evil robotic monster or method until they brought along Legion of Doom.
Welcome to the Legion of Doom. It comes out of the swamp. It's glorious. Yes. The funny thing about the 80s, the 80s was a transitional time in terms of cartoons. Now in the 70s, you weren't allowed to have any kind of violence in terms of, you know, kid cartoons. So a lot of the action adventure cartoons went away. So like your Thunder the Barbarian, that went away. Your Johnny Quest went away. In the 70s, that's why Scooby-Doo was big, because they couldn't do anything else. They couldn't put out new episodes of Space Ghost. So it wasn't until the early 80s where He-Man came out and really kind of changed the game. Now, if you watch He-Man episodes, like I've watched He-Man episodes, you'll notice that he never punches anyone.
Really?
Never hits anyone with his sword. He will wrestle them, essentially. So he might give them a toss. He looks like he's basically doing judo for the most part. And the biggest thing that they wanted, the parents groups wanted back in the day, is that each story have a moral. So that's why a lot of these shows ended up with a moral at the end of the story. So don't drink bleach. Don't talk to strangers. Don't take candies from strangers. Don't punch your sister. So those types of PSAs were their ability to put on more action-adventure cartoons if they had to have a moral to the story. So for example, like G.I. Joe had the big moral at the end of each episode as well. A couple other shows did that too. That, you know, they try to teach you a lesson as long as it's being exciting.
I will say this, the moral story thing was, you know, one of those things that after a while you just went, oh, come on.
Well, you roll your eyes at it too.
Like Orko, you know, Orko was, you know, running a meth lab to raise money for kids, you know, like, you know, Orko, there's better ways to do it. You know, and it was always the condescending tone. You know, Man-at-Arms, a lot of kids want to make friends, but you don't talk to strangers, especially ones that you don't know. Like, what? G.I. Joe had the same thing when you mentioned the punching. G.I. Joe, they never shot anybody. I remember in G.I. Joe, the movie, when I think it was Duke got hit by the snake bolt.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my god, they shot someone, for real.
You know he was supposed to die in that movie, right?
Was he really?
So basically what happened, and we'll get into more Transformers because we'll have a whole episode dedicated to Transformers down the road, but Transformers the movie, Optimus Prime dies. So they kill him. And they got such a negative reaction. So when they did G.I. Joe, they're like, oh, we can't have Duke die. But that's after they already animated it. So if you watch that movie again, you hear Doc like right at the end, oh, Duke's going to make it. He's going to be okay. But you never see him ever again.
And I will say this, that of all the shows, I was a big G.I. Joe guy.
Yeah, me too.
I had like all the G.I. Joe figures. But I liked the G.I. Joe figures because you could do suplexes with them and pile drivers. I used to have wrestling matches with them all. And I had a friend actually, a lot of fun either way fact. A lot of the wrestler names I used originally were all my friends' names. You know, really a lot of good names. But I think with the cartoons, like G.I. Joe, the moral of the story, you know, remember the G.I. Joe PSAs?
Yeah.
Now you know.
There's a great bunch of videos on YouTube where they kind of redubbed all the PSA. And they're hilarious.
Pork chop sandwiches.
Pork chop sandwiches.
Yeah, I get it. And I think I always think about, though, is like, what could they do if they didn't have the shackles of corporate power mucky-mucks going, well, we can't have them actually using the sword. It's the ultimate in just disgusting. I went to this writing class once, and the person that taught the class was a former like Hollywood bigwig, and they were like, they're up in years, and they used to write cartoons. They wrote, you know, sitcoms and a lot of comedy stuff. And she would name drop left and right, but one thing I didn't like was that she was the ultimate like grasp onto one aspect and just not like a bulldog, not let it go. And that's one of those things. Well, all right, he's gonna have like, you know, the cartoons would have like, let's say Batman had, I don't know, a paraglider in one episode.
Yeah.
Well, then you see like 3 weeks later or whatever, there's like the Batman RV, the Batman unicycle, like all these things like he never used.
No.
They just marketed it because Star Wars made so much money on their figures.
Well, we'll go back to Star Wars action figures. Those were the first .75 size action figures. It revitalized the toy market. It saved the action figure market from being like the Barbie-sized dolls to being action figures, so to speak. So Star Wars kind of changed the game in terms of toys in the 80s.
It really was, and I think as kids, one thing they underestimate even now is that people will follow along.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the world of wrestling, it's come down to like a lot of matches are spot fest, as it were. You know, one big moment after another. Well, for kids, they don't give them actual storylines. They give them these bubblegum crap with this awful animation. Hey, everybody, clap your hands. Can you clap your hands? I have nephews. Yeah. You know, can you clap your hands? Yes, you can clap my hands.
Way to break the fourth wall, jerk.
Now you ruined it. Screw you, Bob the Builder. What I'm thinking, though, is I remember like there were certain cartoons I grew up on. One of the biggest cartoons I grew up on wasn't so much a Saturday morning. At least in my neighborhood, they ran it sometimes early Saturday mornings. We had, I'll give you the lineup we had. We had, I was an early riser, 6 a.m.
Jesus.
We had Captain Bob. I don't know if you had Captain Bob out there, but Captain Bob was an artist. And he used a giant, like, tablet of paper. And he would be like, let's draw a skunk today. Well, okay. That was actually the first thing I ever drew of his. He'd have you, like, drawing along at home.
Uh-huh.
And he'd draw this giant circle. And then you come back from commercial, and it was like all drawn in. It was awful. Well, he was to 6 o'clock. 6:30 was either Galaxy Quest or the Baba Papas.
Okay.
For a while, I thought the Baba Papas were made up in my head because no one ever remembered them. I'm like, I remember the Baba Papas. We are the Baba Papas. Da-da-da-da. They were these hairy blobs that like jumped around and shit.
Okay.
And eventually, I found them on YouTube. I'm like, oh my god, they were real. Then we had a 7 o'clock. Oh god, we had like the generic. I think Galaxy Quest. I'm thinking of was like there was like 3 superhero type people, but they were in the galaxy, of course.
Yeah.
And again, there was no ever real fighting. It was always sort of just like more like, you know, we'll attack the base, but not actually the people in it. And you know, one of my favorites though came on at 7 o'clock on Saturday mornings, and then eventually moved throughout the week. Not mine, not yours, but our Star Blazers. Did you watch that one?
I've never seen that before.
Oh my god, I recommend this to anybody. It was it was funny because as a kid, I'm like a young kid watching this, and this was a show from Japan, and it was about the Argo, which was this old Japanese destroyer like battleship, and there was a holocaust on the Earth. So it was like, you know, all the ships were destroyed, and the last ship they had left was this Argo, and it was this giant space battleship with this humongous, like, picture like a nuclear cannon on it. The whole ship was almost like one giant cannon. And what they had to do is they had to go into space and fight. I mean, I forget half of it now. But what's cool about that show is the theme to that Star Blazers is played at like the Japanese military all the time now.
Yeah.
Like it's a big deal. Like it's really like, kind of like their anthem for military. And storyline-wise, remember, I'm a kid. They killed characters off. Artwork was like kind of pre-Robotech, but still like, you know, but really good.
Yeah.
And it was an engaging storyline, and it was like there was betrayal, and there was, you know, twists and turns. And then from that, I kind of got into, you know, Super Friends, and, you know, there was GoBots and Transformers, Robotech, which I watched a lot of Robotech, but I never really remember much of it except for the planes. So I don't think it says much for the show. That I'm like, oh, I remember Robotech, but it didn't really do much for me.
Being talking about the influx of Japanese anime being redubbed here in the United States, I mean, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Voltron, Defender of the Universe. Now, Voltron was a Japanese anime called Go Lion, redubbed and heavily edited for U.S. audiences. Technically, it's Voltron number 3. We'll get into that in a second. I actually watched Go Lion not too long ago, and it was the most violent thing I've seen in cartoon form in my entire life.
Really?
Yeah. So in Go Lion, you'll see people's, you know, heads get chopped off, people getting, you know, cut in half, people killed. There's one part where Voltron takes his sword and decapitates somebody. There's implied rape.
Oh my god.
Yeah. There's implied. Yeah. There's also implied incestual kind of lust in there, all kinds of crazy shit. Like for example, in Voltron, there's the character Sven who gets injured, and the princess has to take over the Blue Lion. The original anime, he dies.
Really?
And she takes over the Blue Lion. So a lot of stark differences in terms of the, what was suitable for children in Japan and what was suitable for children in the United States. For example, you had Lothar, who was the basically the main villain. Would he's enslaving planets and stuff like that, and he would make his new slaves drink the blood of the people that he killed in warfare.
Oh my god!
He would have forced cannibalism in there, where you had these slaves, and then they would take the dead slaves and then feed them to the slaves that were still alive. So that show is bananas. And for a show that they made suitable for kids in the United States, they had to do a lot of clever editing on it.
Yeah.
And they basically had to take the script and kind of redub it and throw it out the window. Because, you watch Voltron, it's pretty tame. There's morals in there too. Some of the dialogue is kind of cheesy, say to speak, but the core of the show is very dark and very violent. Like there's a part of the original pilot for Goal Line where you see the world engulfed in nuclear war, and you see people getting obliterated by nuclear weapons and shit like that. So,
wow,
it's pretty crazy.
Well, I always say when it comes to Japan, you cut on some slack.
To me, Japan is like this mystical, magical place that I definitely want to go see.
Oh yeah, I don't remember the name of it now. There was an earlier precursor to Voltron, and it was 3 planes, and one was blue, one was red, and one was I think yellow. And if the blue, they flew in a certain order. So if it was the red plane up top and the blue in the middle and the yellow on the bottom, they formed one robot. If they flew in a different order of colors, they formed a different robot. Oh, it was called Star something. It's gonna bug me now, but it wasn't Shogun Warriors type thing, but it was similar. And I remember for a while as a kid in the 80s, some people had that one friend who had the 4-foot tall Shogun Warrior robot.
Right.
And you're like, give me that! And of course, he had none of the missiles left because the parents all confiscated them. Shoot your eyes out!
Well, choke on them. That was a big thing.
Right,
too, that people, because that one kid who choked on the Battlestar Galactica action figure.
Was that what it was?
Yeah, he choked on a missile, and then after that, you couldn't have spring-loaded missiles anymore. Apparently, for years.
One dummy ruins it for everybody.
Yeah, jerk.
I remember when I was a kid. Speaking of, damage that we did. For some reason, we decided it was a good idea to see how He-Man action figures would react if you put them in a coffee can and then poured gasoline in there and lit it on fire. And the best part wasn't that we were burning this He-Man figure. I think it was actually Beastman, because we all hated him. So we're burning Beastman, and then my friend thought his father was coming down the road. So one of the kids in our group panicked and kicked the can over to put it out. So then we had gasoline all over his driveway burning with melting parts of Beastman. And we all ran away. Then we were like, oh shit! We started running back to put it out. And water's not the best thing to use to put out fire, gas. So we learned a lot that day. And it wasn't his dad, so it was a false alarm. But it was just one of those things that was burn a He-Man. And of course, He-Man, those figures always had the funkiest smell.
They did have a very distinct smell to them. I used to bite the heads off my He-Mans for some odd reason, and then chew on them, and then I would have headless He-Mans.
Oh boy, that explains a lot.
My dad, to this day, I used to drive him crazy for He-Man action figures. We used to go down to Modell's, which is not the Modell's sporting goods store. There was actual a department store called Modell's as well. They're an offshoot brand of Modell's sporting goods.
Yeah.
I used to go down there, play Vigilante on the arcade, and buy He-Man action figures. And if they didn't have a particular figure that I wanted, I would actually lose my mind and have to be dragged out of the store kicking and screaming.
Wow.
I would just yell at the manager. I'm like, I don't understand why you don't have this in stock. What's wrong with you? I'm like 6.
So what you're saying is not much has changed.
Not at all. Not at all.
By the way, I think I lied. It was Shogun Warriors. There was Guy King, but that wasn't the one I'm thinking of. It was similar. Bugged the hell out of me. But I remember watching Shogun Warriors and Guy King and being like, oh man, and as a kid, how this is how into it I was. I used to use the backpacks that came from the G.I. Joe action figures as spaceships.
Okay.
Because they kind of form that like little spaceship size. I was a creative kid. My mother used to laugh because like I'd have these elaborate. She would tell like, you were little, you'd have elaborate storylines where like one guy was sacrificing himself for the good of everyone. Like, yeah, and, you can find a lot of these toys from that time on eBay, thankfully, and online. Now there's replicas, of course, too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big market for it now. Like in my particular man cave, you would call it, or my wrestling room, as it's called now, I guess. Rapidly running out of space to put things, so I keep my collecting down to a minimum because I'm running out of space in this room. My wife won't let me have it anywhere else in the house, so I can have a full-size Voltron next to the bedstand. That's weird, a little bit off-putting.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think with me, what I ended up doing, I had a lot of action figures and things like that. When I quote unquote wanted to get big in acting, I sold almost everything I owned, and I sold so much stuff. Not that it's worth like $8 gazillion now, but still, you look back and you're like, oh well, whatever. I mean, I have a cabinet or shelves here. One of the shelves is like wrestling stuff. One's like kind of like superhero stuff. I have the only WWF figure that survived was the Brewers of Beefcake figure.
Was it LJN one?
Yeah, the ones that didn't move at all.
Yeah, the rubber ones.
Terrible, yeah.
For some reason, the paint on their nose would always get fucked up. And
right, yeah.
Like, and then for some reason, I played with my Hulk Hogan so much that his trunks, the paint was all off, so it looked like he was naked.
Yes.
It was completely ridiculous.
And I'll say this, the cartoons, we kind of jumped around a bit here, but the Saturday morning cartoons, they used to be a ritual. You would get up in the morning, you'd have your cereal, you'd have like the kind of the younger kid shows, like at 8, 9 in the morning.
You have your Muppet Babies and what have you.
Right, and then you'd have progression to more advanced. Like, I remember for a long time, Justice League was kind of the only show. Then Amazing Spider-Man came along, and then there was like a DC kind of like reboot where I think they had like Cyborg and Brainiac looked a lot more.
That is the Superpowers team because they had Darkseid in that cartoon, and that cartoon was badass.
Yeah, I remember that one more vividly. Yeah. Although I had the entire collection of Super Friends for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, Super Friends went for a long time. They started like in the mid-'70s and ran basically straight through. I mean, they would change the name from time to time, but it ran for a very long time on 2 different networks, from what I understand. And going back to Voltron real quick, there was a second Voltron cartoon that came out in the United States, which was the Vehicle Voltron. You remember Vehicle Voltron?
Roughly. So
basically, it's essentially the same thing. It was taken from a different anime, Armor Fleet Drugger, whatever you want to pronounce it. I think it's Drugger, actually, by the pronunciation. And there was, you had your air team, you had your sea team, and you had your land team, and there was 15 pilots to pilot Voltron. And the funny thing about rewatching that cartoon is like the way kind of military and war kind of works, where the higher ups on both sides don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they're giving these orders to these subordinates, and the subordinates are kind of like, why are we doing this, or kind of why we're doing that. Even the bad guys are like, we want peace, we want to try to make a treaty with these guys, and the top of the bad guys like, no, we're gonna conquer them all. And it was really kind of dynamic for that time. Going back and watching it again, it's like, oh, there's a lot of political drama in this cartoon. But you could get into the characters because there's so many of them. So there's 15 pilots, and then you had your 2 main good guys, I guess you'll call them, like the Commander Hawkins and the other guy, I forget his name. But so many characters to get into, and you only had basically 1 season with episodes, so it's kind of hard to get into it. Plus, there was supposed to be another Voltron that was supposed to come out, but since the Vehicle Voltron got such a lackluster review here in the States that they didn't go with the 3rd Voltron that was supposed to come out. So yeah, in terms of Voltron, they did try reboots. I know they had like a reboot in the 90s. They just recently had one. Nickelodeon put it out that was trash. So it's like anytime they try to reboot some of these older cartoons, it basically doesn't really work out that well for them, because it doesn't have the kind of the animation style of the 80s or kind of the storyline of the 80s. They would try to put some CG in there or do something completely ridiculous. Kind of hoping that this new Voltron that's coming out on Netflix, since Netflix seems to be all the rage nowadays, and that's where all the good shows are going anyway. Hopefully this new Voltron on Netflix will be pretty good.
Oh, I think that's nice about Netflix now is that there's a lot more mediums available too, and you look at Saturday morning cartoons now, and not that I watch them per se, but like, you know, when the TV's on and you're flipping through and there's like maybe 2 or 3 cartoons. They're all, for the most part, terribly written garbage.
One thing I mentioned earlier, the kind of the evolution from your Ren and Stimpy. So you had like your Ren and Stimpy type of cartoon that wasn't like an action adventure; it was more of a comedy kind of cartoon. And I think a lot of people who are doing cartoons today were influenced by that. And so like you always have the kind of the goofy animation, doesn't look that slick. They look underproduced. The storylines are like, you know, whatever. You know, they're trying to be funny. And I don't think it works. I don't think, you know, in 20 years or 30 years, I don't think people will have the same reference for those cartoons as we do for our cartoons.
Yeah, it definitely. I think for a lot of us, you know, that grew up on that stuff, we just have a special place in our heart as kids. But I always think as a consumer, you know, as a kid, you have a choice to what you want to watch.
Yeah.
You know, I see what my nephews have for TV options, and so much of it's garbage and trash. Thankfully, now with YouTube, you can watch almost anything you want, really. Right. You know, I mean, if it's bootlegged or illegally posted, fine, but you're going to find most of it. That's one of my favorite things to do is, like, you got me to the whole Godzilla stuff, so I was checking Godzilla out for a while, and it's... I think there's so much they don't do that they could do, but I think they don't do certain storylines. I think the kids couldn't handle it. No, the kids can handle it. You know, you just got to write to the audience and not write down to them.
Do you think a show like G.I. Joe, for example, now you see like DC Comics doing these kind of their movies, the animated movies that, you know, are for adults and it's adult orientated. For example, like Killing Joke, that storyline's coming out, or actually is out right now. I have to watch it actually on DVD, digital download, what have you. People getting killed. There's violence in there. Could a property like G.I. Joe be modernized for an adult audience, animated, and do well?
I think it could, but the funny thing is, I think you have an audience that's a lot more adult, if you will.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the Star Wars Clone Wars, you know, my friend's kid was watching it, and I started watching it, and it was like, this is really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
Like, this is well done. And even after it got canceled, and it went on to like the, you know, I think it was Netflix or who, I don't know who had it out there, but it was out there. And it was well done. The story, they murder and death. And I think the thing you can do with, you know, you don't have to have it be a kill fest.
No.
But you can use that to address, I mean, hell, Sesame Street addressed death when Mr. Hooper died.
Yeah, that was a sad day.
Super sad.
I think they would benefit, like, for an adult-orientated, you know, G.I. Joe series, you know, for original, you know, video animation or what have you. Possibly something like along the lines for G.I. Joe. Like the He-Man reboots. I remember that the first He-Man reboot, or I guess it was a sequel, where he went into space, and now he's Space He-Man, and that was like trash. That was like 88 or so. And that was just bad news all around. Now, there's a popular kind of theory on the internet nowadays that He-Man was a gay character. Thinking back to, you know, what He-Man is and who he is, do you think he was a gay character or written that way?
I could see that. I think too is when you say like, was he a gay character? I don't mean the revisionist history like, oh yeah, he was gay. I mean like, do you think maybe a guy, you know, wrote him, whatever? But it's like right now with the Captain America, you know, they wanted. I remember it was funny because the whole thing came out recently with the Hail Hydra.
Right.
And if you remember, right before that, there was this whole thing about turn Captain America gay, you know, like get him a boyfriend. And I said to a friend of mine, I said, they were so pissed about that, they did the Hail Hydra to turn the tide. Because no one talked about the gay boyfriend thing anymore. It was all like, he's bad? And then I was like, he couldn't be a gay bad guy. It wouldn't happen.
No.
But similarly, I think with He-Man, they had enough storylines in there, but I'd have to watch it a lot to remember. But like, you know, his relationship with Man-at-Arms, Man-at-Arms, like I don't know if he was ever like, well, Man-at-Arms, that was a good mission. Remember, don't skimp on the lube.
You know, even looking at Prince Adam's attire, he's like wearing like the pink tights with the white shirt with like the burgundy vest. I mean, like, it makes you wonder a little bit. You know, he never really got off the ground with his relationship with like Tila or anything like that. They never wrote in a love interest for him. He never had one. So it wouldn't be like Captain America being gay, where, you know, he had love interest throughout, comic book history and what have you.
Yeah.
He-Man, if you just base it on the TV show, he's never had a love interest like.
I know it's a popular thing to do is like take characters that are beloved and and somehow kink them up or whatever. With He-Man, I think you look at that physique and everything else, like whatever. There's a great meme that's out there about Barbie doll, and it says has been people know the pressure of trying to be perfect, and it shows the He-Man figure, and it's like we don't.
Yeah,
that's definitely something that I think, as far as setting, misconceptions. I remember when I used to draw when I first was in art class, and I would do figure drawing, and I would draw a lot of my figures like kind of that He-Man / Marvel Comics bulging biceps,
right.
or wrestling. It's just how it was kind of presented, and I think that's it's part of the way it was growing up. As a viewer, I could disassociate myself from that and be like, oh, that's just He-Man, it's a cartoon. I didn't think like, oh, he's a role model.
Right. I don't try to get big and strong like He-Man. Blah 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 blah.
Right.
And it's funny with a lot of these shows, they have like kind of the annoying sidekicks. So like in He-Man, you had Orko. Thundercats, you had Snarf. It's like their version of Jar Jar Binks, and I hated those characters so much.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I hated Orko. Like, why are you here? Like, you'd be killed in 30 seconds. I don't understand. The same thing with Thundercats. They're on this new planet. They're trying to survive. I'm like, how did Snarf live? I don't understand.
Yeah, Snarf sucked. Do you remember a show called Galaxy Rangers?
Yes.
That was a really good show. That was an underrated show.
I mean, there's so many underrated shows that are out there that maybe only got like the one season or what have you. Mask comes to mind. Silverhawks comes to mind. Those shows, specifically really come to mind when it comes to like, okay, these shows could have been bigger what they were, but for whatever reason they didn't catch on or what have you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is that like Galaxy Rangers artwork was really well done, and considering the time. But I always felt like sometimes like they just got the wrong slot. Like, remember one of the shows that sticks in my head because I had a bunch of toys. My parents used to buy me toys. And it would be like they would buy. I actually guess like looking back, maybe it was the toys that were on sale. I don't know, but it would be like GoBots. I had a ton of GoBots.
Oh God.
And it was just like my friends had Transformers, and I had GoBots.
I gotta say this about the Transformer toys. And I know I'm probably in the minority on this. Those original Transformer toys were not good. They weren't as bad as GoBots, but those original Transformer toys are not good.
There's a famous episode that happened with my friends among us where one of my friends, when they were kids, they were neighbors, and one of the kids in the group got the Optimus Prime, like the early one, and he had it for like his birthday, and he had it for like all of an hour. And one of the kids was like, "Can I hold it?" And he held it for like 2 seconds. The arm broke off.
Oh God!
And he was like, "Ah!" But there was also I'm not thinking it was Jason and it wasn't the Argonauts.
I remember my parents. I wanted a Teddy Ruxpin when I was a kid. Teddy Ruxpin, for those of you who don't know, was this teddy bear that you put tapes in his back and he would read you a story, and it was good fun. But apparently Teddy Ruxpin was just too much money for my parents. So instead they got me a Freddy Ruxpin that didn't talk. And I was very upset.
Wow.
Yeah. Because bootlegs from China were a big thing in the 80s. So you had your bootleg, Freddy Ruxpins, you had your fake He-Mans, you had your fake wrestlers, you had so many fake stuff on the market too. And I can see where parents could get confused.
There was a cartoon, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but it was terrible. Oh, what was it called? It was like these guys drove cars. Jason the Wheeled Warriors, that's what it was.
Yes, it is. I
had a ton of toys from that group. Particularly the bad guys, which were these like plant-like monsters.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And they just sucked. And I was like, what? So, one of my favorite memories as a kid is my dad one time came home from New Hampshire with a bunch of fireworks. And we blew up a bunch of models and toys. So,
again, a thing to do with, kids in the 80s where, like for me, example, you would take the bottle rockets, you would strap your G.I. Joe, with his parachute on it, hopefully, shoot up in the sky, and hopefully he would come down with the parachute. But 9 times out of 10, they just blew up and they're in a million pieces. Because back in the day, we used to play with our toys, and that's a big difference from today, I think. You go find a creek somewhere in the woods, and you take your your G.I. Joe boat and kind of play with the creek with the water, and kind of have battles in your backyard or in the woods somewhere. I don't think a lot of kids nowadays are going and playing in the woods by themselves.
No,
not happening. I'm pretty sure I won't let my kid do that either. Galaxy Rangers was the show, for those people who don't know, was basically like a space western type show.
Yes, they had awesome powers too.
Yeah.
There was one guy, my favorite guy was the guy that could transform into any kind of creature in the universe, like their species.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really kind of cool, because they just transformed. It was like a fun storyline. They were always, fighting crime, whatever. I don't remember half of it now, but it's one of those shows that you're almost afraid to go back and watch. Like I used to use the example of Clash of the Titans as a kid, and Beastmaster, good lord. R is not yet satisfied. You go back and watch now, like, that movie's awful.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I mean, it's a fun ride, but it's just awful.
Again, there is a nostalgic kind of veil that we do put on when it comes to stuff from back in the day. I'm not going to deny that at all. Looking at some of these shows hold up, and some of these shows don't hold up. So, but I think that's for anything. Would it be action movies in the 80s, some of the sitcoms in the 80s, movies? Some things hold up well, and some things don't. And sometimes you remember something being, one way, and it ends up being a completely different way. Or you remember loving something as a kid and end up sucking as an adult.
That's kind of life.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. Another show out there, I think I mentioned it earlier, was Silverhawks. I had the action figures as a kid. Never really watched the show all that often, but I did have the action figures as a kid. I always felt that Silverhawks was like a Thundercats type of ripoff anyway. So
yeah.
So I didn't watch a whole lot of those episodes at all.
We should do a podcast on GoBots and do it on like a cassette. Because it was such a terrible show. I mean,
wasn't the main character named Leader One?
I forget now.
Yeah, I think it was Leader One, which is probably the world's worst character names. Character names in the 80s were also kind of interesting. Point to He-Man as an example. So He-Man, you had Ram Man, Manny Faces, Beast Man. Again, completely ridiculous type. Like, they didn't even try with those names. They was like,
yeah.
What was the I forget the bird guy. It's gonna drive me nuts now. Oh, you had Mechaneck. But you had Mechaneck with the guy he twisted and his fucking head went up, and those were pretty badass.
Just remember there was a GoBot called Psykill.
Oh boy.
And Dumper.
I took a dumper 15 minutes before we started this.
Hey, I had a guy call out of work because he had diarrhea.
Nice.
And then he said, I feel shitty today. And I was like, you sure do.
Sure do, my friend.
Like, I mean, some of these names, it's funny because I one time met with some people from Hasbro to talk about an idea thing I was working on. Yeah. And when I pitched this one idea, when they talked about, like, the process of, like, creating the names, like, they're like, well, you don't do your market research and you can't use certain names unless it's, like, kind of a generic name. It really is true. I mean, you can't just use any name. But that's why, like, you have so many characters now that are named like these really bizarre names, or the spelling has extra Y's and Q's in there. It never existed before. What's your superhero name? Jim. Ah. All right, that's not taken.
Big Jim was the original He-Man line, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, Mattel had a line of figures called Big Jim, and basically that evolved into He-Man. Okay. He-Man being a Conan-type ripoff, but it actually predates Conan the movie, so... And I believe Conan the Barbarian is public domain anyway. I'm pretty sure. So I think the people who came out with Conan the Barbarian, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, for those of you who don't know, they tried to sue He-Man for copyright infringement, but I think they lost.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a big thing. And it was funny because the He-Man action figures actually predate the He-Man TV show, so... It was basically what they used to do is like they'll come up with an action figure, like, oh, we need a accompanying cartoon to kind of promote it. So that's what a lot of these cartoons are. So, like, for example, G.I. Joe, if they have a new action figure coming out, they would have a episode featuring that particular new character that they just put into the toy line. So basically, a lot of them are 20 minutes worth of advertising, and it worked because I bought all of those fucking G.I. Joe action figures.
Oh no.
Do you remember the aircraft carrier? I think it was the USS.
Joe?
Yeah, it was huge. It's like
not only do I, my cousin had that. My
get
cousin
the fuck out of here.
My cousin had like every GI Joe toy. He had the base. Remember the Cobra base?
Yeah.
He had the aircraft carrier. I went to Maine one time to visit them like for Christmas one year. He had in his front like garage area. He had like the ship. He had that. He had the biggest thing I had for GI Joe was like APV personnel carrier.
Right.
But he had like a ton of stuff, man. He had like it was crazy.
I remember my cousin, because I think everyone in that family has that one cousin who gets a lot of stuff, or at least in my mind. Again, I don't know how reality kind of works, but from my childhood recollection, how it went. He had a Sky Striker, which was the G.I. Joe jet, which I didn't have. I thought that was fantastic, by the way.
G.I. Joe. I got mad because of the shameless like shilling, you know.
They got pretty bad with it. I mean, later on throughout the seasons, they kind of went to a less military feel, more of a science fiction type of feel, especially with the action figures. The action figures, they would re-release them, but they'd be like neon colors because it was later on in the 80s. And when they did the second series, which was produced by Deke, I remember the pilot episode is where G.I. Joe and Cobra have to join forces to destroy a drug dealer. And you had like Lieutenant Falcon all up on drugs and stuff like that, and another like a Cobra officer's sister is on drugs, and they have to join forces to lay the smackdown on crack.
Crack is whack.
Yeah, and it goes back to that war on drugs that was really useless in the 80s. The funniest thing about that, and it was Nancy Reagan, by the way, for those of you who don't know, her war on drugs. So one of my favorite episodes of a TV show called Different Strokes.
Oh no.
Yes. It was the one that Nancy Reagan appeared, and she goes to Arnold, who's the main character, Gary Coleman, now deceased. So she goes in this classroom and is like, how many of you guys have taken a illegal drug? And you have a couple of people put their hands up, and then like Arnold is astonished about the amount of people that are raising their hands up, and like there's a one white kid who was like, I smoke crack. And it was completely ridiculous and kind of out of left field. So you would have those very special episodes of your sitcoms in the 80s, and they would be kind of ridiculous. Like the time where Arnold and Dudley almost get molested by the bike shop owner. Like, yes. They're supposed to teach you something.
It taught me not to watch Different Strokes.
Yeah. I mean, not that they're sitcoms today, because there aren't much in terms of sitcoms. A lot of them don't have those very special episodes, or like, teenage pregnancy or AIDS.
Oh, that was always my favorite this week on a very special Fresh Prince. It was always that like, it's going to be something good.
Yeah. And then it ends up being that, like I remember the Facts of Life one where Natalie, who was the heavy-set one, was the first one to lose her virginity, and it was weird.
Oh, yeah.
Or the time Tootie was such a big fan of Jermaine Jackson that she almost did some bad stuff to get his autograph. Little known fact, or maybe a big known fact, I don't know, but Facts of Life was a spinoff of Different Strokes. So,
oh, was it really?
Yeah, they actually had a couple of crossover episodes where there's one with Arnold and Tootie, and they're inside of a bank when it's getting robbed. And you're going to see all the ridiculous stuff that happens there.
Wow.
And some of these sitcoms would get, these more the 70s, but you would get your weird kind of offshoot cartoons like your Fat Albert, which is completely insane. Your Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling, which wasn't good at all, because I went back and watched those, and those are pretty awful. Like, those don't hold up as well. You had your Jackson 5 cartoon. You had your Ewoks cartoon, which I'm very surprised about is that Star Wars didn't have a legit cartoon throughout the 80s. That makes no sense.
Yeah, I wonder if they ever tried, or happened like that. Just nothing came through.
Like, they had that Ewoks one, but that's more like an offshoot of the terrible Ewok movie that they came out with.
Yeah.
Like, that should be the that's the real episode 7 is the Ewok movie. It's awful. And I wish, as a kid, I don't know how I would have reacted to the 24-hour cartoon networks that they have nowadays. I'm not sure if that's a positive or a negative, because a lot of those shows I finally remember and but we had to watch them because there was literally nothing else to watch.
Right.
So you would have those Saturday morning cartoons or those weekday afternoon kind of shows, and you would sit there and maybe you would watch a Tom and Jerry. You know, I'm not the biggest Tom and Jerry fan, but it was on. I had no choice but to watch it. Or I would watch a Sailor Moon because it was on. Or I watch a Gem because it was on. Or Care Bears. Or these shows that I probably would not be interested. I would much rather have a G.I. Joe marathon. But nowadays, you can be selective in what you watch. It's like, oh, if my daughter wants to watch Sophia the First, you can literally watch that all day. And, you know, we have it up on Netflix or Hulu, wherever it's on, but she literally watches it, she has the ability to watch it all day nonstop if she really wanted to. An ability that we did not have as kids. It definitely gave us an opportunity to kind of expand what we watched because we had no choice. So maybe you wouldn't have watched a Galaxy Rangers if you had your choice. But you watched it and you were able to like it, so it kind of broadened your horizons. Same thing with like sitcoms in the 80s, or their main television shows would be Different Strokes or an A-Team or Knight Rider or what have you. It was either that or you watched nothing. So your choices were limited, but you were able to kind of like broaden your horizon. And do you remember the Mr. T cartoon?
Oh, sure, Mr. T and his Olympic squad players, whoever they were.
Yeah, they're like, I guess they're like Olympians of some sort. I don't remember offhand. I do remember the amazing cereal he did have, though. That was fantastic.
Yes.
I think they would drive around and solve mysteries or something in a van. It was weird. I pitied the fool. There was an awful Karate Kid cartoon, which I watched. There was an even worse Rambo cartoon.
Really?
Yeah, there's a Rambo cartoon.
I remember that one.
But they made him, instead of being, how Rambo was all like fucked up from the war, kind of violent, shooting people, destroying towns, and what have you. And in the second movie, he was more reluctant to go back and that kind of stuff. So in the cartoon series, he's super patriotic. And he's basically, I'm going to help the Pentagon on whatever mission they send me on. And they really kind of changed the character. He basically just used the name and just made their own kind of military-type hero. But yeah, there was a Rambo cartoon, which was...
Close enough.
Yeah, not good. They should have done a RoboCop cartoon, but whatever. So were there any other shows that you were a big fan of, or maybe any of the action figures that you had that we haven't discussed yet?
Oh, boy. I had tons of action figures. I had some really obscure ones, but one thing I did do a lot of was crossovers, where like I would use the Rancor Keeper as like Abdul the Butcher.
Nice.
And I would have like bit of cut marks in their foreheads and red marker for blood. Oh man, I think I had a lot of. I know I had a lot of GI Joes, but it's funny actually. One of the first ones I had was Airborne.
Okay.
And I had that figure for the longest time. Because when I sold off a lot of my stuff, I kept a few action figures. I kept Iron Man, Captain America, Green Lantern. Those are my three favorites.
Now, was the Captain America, Iron Man, was that from the Secret Wars series that came out in '84? Yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I got the Toy Biz ones, I think, later on in the 80s that came out.
Okay.
That great X-Men line at the time, and then Marvel superheroes. I remember I had a Venom action figure that kind of sprayed goo from his chest, which was weird. But I used to do wrestling matches with my superheroes, and I would write them in a book. So I would write the results in a book. And I would have like Wolverine versus Superman, and with their finisher, and I would make up finishers for them and that kind of stuff. So, what time was wrestling on by you?
I think it was 11 o'clock in the morning, if I remember correctly.
Because here in New York, it was at noon. So we basically had all the Saturday morning cartoons, and then wrestling would come on at noon, and then after that is where I saw like the Kung Fu flicks, so like the Bruce Lee movies and Godzilla was after wrestling. At that point, maybe American Gladiators came on at one point. There was WMAC Masters at one point, which was this weird, goofy martial arts show that was like wrestling, but it was with martial arts, and it was weird.
Oh boy!
Yeah, so it was funny because it was like a video game because they would have health bars and shit, and the two guys would fight, and the health bar would go down, and then once you get down to completely out in terms of the health bar, they would lose, and they would like win like medals and shit. I guess it was just capitalizing off the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat rage back in the day. Now, do you prefer your cartoons to be more of a like comic book style, so like your X-Men, your Super Friends, Spider-Mans, or kind of like their own properties?
I enjoyed the Superman, Super Friends type stuff. You know, like the storylines. I remember there was a distinct difference for a long time because for a while we would see just these one-off episodes that were never really connected. There was like the same characters. It was always like any one of them could have happened before or after the other.
Right.
And then Legion of Doom series came along, and they kind of built on that a little bit. Not so much overall, but it gave it a little bit more. Because I remember watching them and thinking, like, well, why wouldn't you just like do the same thing? You'd like do it again, but like change it. It was like you messed up this time. You're all still alive. Pull off the plan. Come on, man.
It was weird.
Pull together.
With the original Super Friends cartoons, they would have like more like world type disasters than a threat from a supervillain. And then you had the 13. It was the Challenge of the Super Friends, I believe that show was called. You had 13 of the most evilest supervillains in the world. So you had I think Bizarro was in it, Scarecrow.
I don't
Lex
know if
Luthor.
Speaking of that, I don't know if it's still up or not. But one of the first videos I put on YouTube was during the Yankees and Red Sox series, and I put that like to pictures to music, and the music I used was Super Friends, and it started off with like the various Yankees, and then where it kind of only one group does stand against them was Veritek punching A-Rod in the face.
Nice.
Yeah, good days. I was a huge Thunder the Barbarian fan. I loved the concept, but of course, his poor man's lightsaber and really terrible clothing and his rip-off Wookiee.
He had like the worst sidekicks ever.
Rip-off Wookiee and the Magically, they couldn't do much.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Space Ghost. I thought that was a pretty cool show. Big fan of Johnny Quest. Obviously, there'd be reruns. They weren't really out in the... But I thought the production style on that was really kind of cool. For those of you who understand the production value of Johnny Quest, just watch like an episode of Archer, and it's very similar, I think. Johnny Quest. His dad was an idiot.
That was the twist, basically.
Like you take his son to somewhere super dangerous, he'd get kidnapped, or there'd be some sort of like indigenous tribe trying to kill him or something like that. But, completely bizarre. I always wondered why there weren't a Indiana Jones cartoon, because I thought that was ripe for a Saturday morning kind of adventure cartoon.
Yeah.
But they never did anything with the property. It was weird.
Someone somewhere, some lawyer ruined it.
Yeah, I definitely. Harrison Ford. It's like, I don't want my likeness to be on that cartoon. It sucks. Blah, 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 blah. Do you remember a cartoon? It was like an All-Stars. That's what the name of the cartoon was, All-Stars. It was like Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, and Bo Jackson. And they would form a team and fight crime.
I don't remember that, actually.
Yeah, it was really weird. It came on right after Captain N and the Game Master, which was like the Nintendo kind of cartoon they had at the time.
Captain N?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
He had the light gun as a weapon. I just remember because King Hippo from Punch-Out's in it.
King Hippo!
And he was purple for some reason. I'm not really sure why, because it was weird.
And Grimace. Yes.
That show did have Simon Belmont from Castlevania in it, though. But he was a little off, I felt. I don't know what was wrong with him. And there was also the Super Mario Brothers Super Show with Captain Lou Albano playing Super Mario in the live action scenes.
I remember that.
Yeah, and he had the Super Mario song, which was completely ridiculous. And God bless their hearts. The 80s was a mystical, magical time where everything was badass and awesome, except for the government. And poverty. And AIDS. But as a kid growing up in the 80s, with your slap bracelets and your neon biker shorts and your Thundercat action figures, it was a really interesting time to grow up in, and it was definitely interesting times. I can't really speak about the 90s because I was already a young adult and teenager at that time. But in raising children today, a good cartoon is a good cartoon regardless of when it came out. So there's cartoons from the 50s, there's cartoons from the 40s, there's cartoons from the 60s and 70s are all good as well. So if you're a kid, a millennial, or I don't know what the next generation is going to be called if you're my daughter's age who's 3 or my son's age that's 9. Take some time out and kind of go back and give these cartoons a chance, because I think 9 times out of 10 you'll like them, and I think we can revive the action adventure genre for cartoons.
Yeah.
Which is missing from today's lineups and cartoons in general. So check out a G.I. Joe, check out a Galaxy Ranger, check out Silverhawks, Mask, Cops, Thundercats, all these great shows that we had the privilege of being in a time where we were able to watch these things.
Yeah.
Spend some time. If you don't like one, there's probably a different one that you'll enjoy. So to everyone out there, give these shows a chance. Give them a watch. They're available everywhere. I'm not shilling here. You can buy them on DVD. You can digitally download them. You can watch episodes on YouTube, Hulu, Netflix probably have some. So do yourself a favor and check out